Death at Bishop's Keep, Chapter 19. Is there in human form that bears a heart, a wretch, a villain, lost to love and truth, that can with studied sly and snaring art betray sweet Jenny's unsuspecting youth? Robert Burns, The Cutter's Saturday Night. Kate was at the typewriter that afternoon when her work was interrupted by Amelia. "You wanted in the drawing room, miss," she said. Kate looked up frowning. She had just finished her aunt's work for the day and settled down to Beryl Bartle's latest chapter. She did not wish to leave it, for she was trying to extricate her heroine from a particular perilous situation. "Thank you, Amelia," she said, "but I would rather—" "There's callers, miss," Amelia said flatly, and withdrew. Kate, resigned, tidied her russet hair into a semblance of neatness and smoothed the dark grey serge skirt she wore to work in. Her grey cotton shirtwaist was badly rumpled, and one white cuff was ink-stained. Well, that was just too bad, she thought defiantly, collecting her papers and hiding them in the desk. Whoever had interrupted her writing time would simply have to take her as she was, dressed for work, rather than attired for afternoon callers. Kate wasn't entirely surprised when she saw that one of the visitors was Eleanor Marston, attractive and vivacious in china blue silk. She was, however, a little nonplussed when Sir Charles Sheridan stood and bowed. "Miss Audley," he said. Kate felt herself reddening under his inquisitive glance. "Sir Charles?" she murmured, immediately conscious of her soiled cough and workaday costume. She sat down, remembering his dry amusement at her walking suit the day before, and wondering if he thought that she was in the habit of wearing unladylike dress. She hoped he would not mention the encountering her in Sir Archibald's field tent, for across the room Aunt Jaggers was scowling over her cup of tea. It would not be easy to explain why she had gone to the excavation without implicating Aunt Sabrina. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly when she took in Kate's appearance, but leaned forward. "My dear Catherine," she exclaimed, "how good it is to see you again!" Her cuffs were elegant with lace, and a blue straw hat, jauntily beribboned, perched on the back of her head. Dainty blue boots peeped out from underneath her skirt. Kate smiled. "I'm glad you came," she said with a genuine warmth. "I had hoped to see you again before very long." She looked curiously at Sir Charles. Some devil stirred in her, and she said lightly, "Did you come to inquire after the bats, Sir Charles? I understand the ruins are quite full of them." Aunt Sabrina had told her about the remains of the old keep across the little lake at the foot of the lawn. She had planned to go there as soon as she could. At the mention of bats, Aunt Jaggers made a sputtering noise. Sir Charles looked regretful. "I am afraid Miss Marston would not permit such an excursion today," he said. "But I certainly hope to make a later investigation. The bat in question is quite wonderful." "Sir Charles," Eleanor admonished, tapping his wrist. She turned to Kate. "Really, Catherine, you mustn't encourage him." Aunt Sabrina sat back in her chair, chuckling. "And how is your mother, Miss Marston?" "Quite well," Eleanor said, "although simply maddened with wedding plans. There is so much to do." She smiled. "She asked me to inquire whether you plan to invite the GFS to hold their annual tea at Bishop's Keep this year." Aunt Sabrina nodded. "Tell Lady Marston that I have already informed the vicar that I would be glad for the society to come, but he has not yet fixed upon a day." Aunt Jaggers narrowed her eyes. She seemed about to say something, but Kate spoke first. "The GFS?" she asked. "Is that some sort of organization?" Eleanor giggled. "The group is often referred to as the God-forsaken spinsters," she said. Amelia's back turned to Kate seemed to stiffen. Kate glanced from Eleanor to Amelia and frowned. "How old must one be to belong to this group?" she asked innocently. Sir Charles cleared his throat, and she caught his glance. His lips were twitching, and his brown eyes were wryly amused. But Eleanor was not amused. "Oh, not you, my dear Catherine," she exclaimed, brows arched in horror. "You could never." "Perhaps I'm too old," Kate persisted. Sir Charles began to cough into his napkin. Aunt Sabrina laughed. "The Girls' Friendly Society," she told Kate, "is an association of young women in service. Its annual tea is arranged by the vicar and sponsored by several of the ladies of the parish. Many of our girls are away from home for the first time, you see, and At loose ends, Aunt Jaggers put in. They should do better to stay in their places and work rather than gallivanting about foot-loose in gowns and gloves. Teasing forgotten, Kate spoke up in protest. But surely servants are permitted to do as they like with their half days, Aunt. I hardly imagine, niece, Aunt Jaggers remarked icily, that you are sufficiently acquainted with the servant class to have formed a valid opinion on the matter. Kate bit her tongue. Aunt Sabrina moved in a chair, but said nothing. The uncomfortable silence was broken by Mud's murmured direction to Amelia to replenish the tray of tea cakes. Across from Kate, Sir Charles sipped his tea. His glance met hers over the rim of the cup, and she was startled to find it appreciative. He put down his cup and inquired, "Are you enjoying the autumn countryside, Miss Adley? I can recommend the mill and the locks at Flatford on the Stour. It is not a long walk from here, and quite picturesque." "I'm afraid I've been much too busy with my work to gallivant about the countryside," Kate said. She glanced at Aunt Jaggers. The devil spoke. "With or without gloves?" Aunt Jaggers snorted. Aunt Sabrina looked distressed. "How inconsiderate of me, Catherine. Really, you must take some time off, if only to see the ruins. You are working much too hard." Eleanor's cup rattled. "Working?" she asked, staring at Kate. "Why, Catherine, whatever are you doing?" "I have come to Bishop's Keep to serve as my aunt's secretary," Kate said. She displayed her inky cuff ruefully, and as you see, it can be quite a messy business. Eleanor's cornflower blue eyes widened. "Your aunt's secretary? But I thought you were... I had hoped we could be..." Kate lifted her chin. Eleanor's voice trailed off before she finished her sentence, but her meaning was clear. She had thought that Kate was a member of the leisure class, just as she was, and therefore they could be friends. Kate felt a sharp tinge of disappointment, but she should not blame Eleanor, who could hardly help being brought up to despise honest work, and to think of it as something only done by her inferiors. She was the one who was at fault. She should never have allowed Eleanor to think that she was something other than what she was. "I'm sorry if I have deceived you, Eleanor," she said quietly. "I did not come to Bishop's Keep to be a lady of leisure." She hesitated, hoping that there might still be a chance of friendship. "But if you were about to suggest that we go for a walk or a short drive some afternoon, I'm sure that Aunt Sabrina would be glad to let me take an hour." "Certainly," Aunt Sabrina said warmly. "I'm only sorry I did not think to suggest it myself. Excuse me, Mum." The door had opened to admit Amelia, hesitant and without the tea cakes. "There's someone to see you, Mum, but I misdoubt that..." "Stop blathering and show them in," Aunt Jaggers snapped. Amelia frowned uncertainly. "But he's a constable, Mum." Aunt Jaggers' face grew dark. "Then send him to the kitchen." Aunt Sabrina intervened. "Did he say what his errand was, Amelia?" Amelia's head bobbed. "He said 'twas news, Mum. Important news." "Then show him in, please," Aunt Sabrina said. In a moment, Amelia reappeared. With her was a portly man, balding with a pockmarked face. His navy serge uniform was grimy, his boots sheened with dust. He held a tall hat under one arm and a newspaper-wrapped parcel under the other. He looked uncertainly from one person to another, as if unsure whom to address. Aunt Sabrina relieved him of his uncertainty. "Good day, sir," she said. "I believe you have news, Constable." "Clay, Mum," the man said, stepping forward. "From Chelmsford." Kate recognized the name of a town that the train had passed through about 30 miles from London. "I'm sorry to intrude, Mum, but I've brought something that was left for you. I was on my way to Dedham, you see, and thought it best to bring it to you rather than send it by post, seeing what it was." "Something left for me?" Aunt Sabrina frowned. "How odd. I know no one in Chelmsford." The constable shifted his bulk. "To be sure, Mum," he mumbled, "but happened to be a girl been and died yesterday night in a workhouse, you see, and she left." "The girl?" Aunt Sabrina spoke sharply. "What girl?" The constable frowned. He managed to secure his hat under the same arm that held the parcel, and fished in his pocket, pulling out a soiled scrap of paper. "Name o' Jenny 'twere," he said, reading from it. "Jenny Blyly." Suddenly there was a piercing shriek, the cry of a soul in torment. All eyes in the room went to Amelia. "Not Jenny!" she cried. "Dear God, not Jenny!" Cook stood in the kitchen, staring down at the open parcel on the table. "And how'd she die?" she asked, her voice brittle threat. The constable lifted a mug of hot tea that Nettie had given him. "In the workhouse," he said. Looked up. "The babe died before her." Amelia's muffled sobbing could be heard from the corner by the fire. Harriet was huddled beside her knee, trying to comfort her. Pocket stood at an uneasy distance away, his face working. Maud sat on the other end of the table, his head bowed. Cook lifted the ragged dress from the table. That and the green knitted shawl and the worn shoes were all that was in the parcel. "Nothing else?" she asked the constable. "I'm her aunt. Who was to tell her poor mother how she ended?" He countered her question with one of her own. "Do you know someone called Tom Potter?" Amelia's sobbing grew louder. "I do," Cook said, shortly. "Why?" "It was a note for him in the pocket of the dress," the constable said. He fished in his trousers. "Here it is." Cook took the crumpled bit of paper from his hand. "I'll see that he gets it," she said. The constable had been gone several minutes before Cook roused herself to smooth out the note. She went to the lamp and held it up so that the poorly penciled script was illuminated by the light. Finally she turned and spoke into silence. "Nettie," she said, "fetch me the shawl. I have an errand." Nettie's mouth made a round O. But there's dinner," she said. "Mrs. Jaggers will—" "Jaggers can go to bloody hell," Cook said fiercely. "That's where the Lord sends murderers of poor babes and young girls." Maud lifted his head and spoke. "And if the Lord don't dispatch her quick," he said through clenched teeth, "I will." From the doorway there was a stifled gasp. Cook looked up to see the startled face of young Miss Hartley. Aunt Sabrina was not eager to talk about what had happened, but Kate managed to wring a little information out of her that evening, after they finished the cold supper that Nettie and Harriet scraped together in an unexplained absence of cook. Jenny Blythe, barely 19, had been Amelia's predecessor. She had disappeared 6 months before under circumstances that Aunt Sabrina would not divulge, but seemed to involve Aunt Jaggers. In fact, having heard what she had in the kitchen, it was clear to Kate that the servants blamed Aunt Jaggers for Jenny's disappearance as well as her death. But even though Aunt Sabrina would not discuss the details of Jenny's story, its sad outline was not hard for Kate to reconstruct. The girl must have become pregnant. Aunt Jaggers, discovering the fact, would have heaped recriminations on her head and discharged her on the spot with no hope of character. Penniless, despairing, she found her way to Chelmsford Workhouse, where her newborn baby had died, and she herself shortly after. Jenny's tale was the stuff of Beryl Bardwell's novels, and under other circumstances, Kate might have pursued the details with the writer's interested curiosity. But echoing in her mind was Amelia's tortured cry and Cook's impassioned consignment of Aunt Jaggers to hell. And when she saw Maud the next morning, face impassive as always, eyes hooded, arranging the creamed eggs and kidney on the breakfast sideboard, Kate remembers his ominous threat with a shiver of cold foreboding. She was too practical for presentiment, but even she could not escape the certainty that something dreadful was going to happen at Bishop's Keep.